I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
All right. Hello. Thank you guys for joining us today. And thank you, Stefan, for taking some time to discuss Ukraine with my reader group and others who have wanted to join in on this discussion and learn more about Ukraine, what's going on.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Good. Good. So now, why don't you tell us where is it you're at right now and how long have you been there and what is your job and what specifically do you do basically?
Good question. That's pretty much what I start out with when I'm trying to do one of these things. Okay. Hi, my name is Stefan Korshak. I'm an American. I'm from Texas. I am a reporter by profession. I've been doing this job one way or another for close on 30 years. I've worked for news agencies, television, newspapers. Right now, I'm working for an English language newspaper, a very old one actually, out of Kyiv. It's the oldest English language pub in the country. It's called Kyiv Post. I'm the Senior Defense Correspondent in that job. I am right now sitting in Kyiv in the southern part of the city. Skies are quiet, and I've been here for most of the war. However, part of my job is going to places outside of Kiev. I do that sometimes. I have gone to the front line. I talk to soldiers all the time, but I wouldn't want to give you guys the idea that I'm a combat correspondent who's constantly dodging bullets. It's dangerous on the front line, and like most guys like me, we don't try to hurry and get up to the front line as often as possible, but it happens. My background, I always like to know that about the person who I'm going to watch in one of these videos. As I mentioned, I'm from Texas, from Houston. Went to university in the East in DC, George Washington, later on graduate school, Yale. I served in the United States Army. I was an intelligence officer, S2, 5th of the 8th Infantry, Fulda Gap. So later stages of the Cold War. What that has helped me with in a lot of the work that I've done subsequently is that I sort of started doing the reporting thing with a relatively good knowledge of, basic Soviet equipment, which now is like Russian equipment, and things like tactics and lay of land, because it's an infantry battalion that I was with, and artillery effects and line of sight and that sort of thing. I started learning that at an early age. And so part of my writing that I do now, I can see how that just influences it. And if you guys are sort of curious about drones, one of the things that just fascinates me is not just the tech side of how the drones are developed and how they get better. And, there's this constant arms race of who has the next best technology for this particular point in time, but also the tactics and how the units have developed and the kind of people who have sort of started out as almost hobby operators. And I know guys who are now commanding, well, I know a guy personally who's commanding a full drone regiment. Ukraine is just in some ways light years, the Ukrainian military, light years ahead of a lot of militaries in terms of incorporating these things into a conventional army. And it's just a fascinating subject. And I could talk about that alone for a long time. But that being said, as you can see behind me, there's a lot of books. I military history is a hobby of mine since way back. So almost any aspect of this war, from let's just sit down and chew the fat and drink a beer, I can talk for a long time almost about anything at varying levels of confidence. Most of the time I am going to be in these kinds of things, I'm disciplined enough to say, okay, this I'm very sure about, that I'm speculating, that's my job, is to like make that stuff accurate as I can. But if you hear me saying something that sounds a little bit way off the wall, call me on it. I'm going to try really hard, but I might say this is the case when in fact I'm intuiting or I'm guessing. But I'll try not to do that. So I guess I hope that's enough of an introduction. If you got or something else you want to know about me,
No,
ask
I think
away.
that's great. I think that's great. And I know one of the questions a lot of people have is, we've now had a change of administration. We're now entering the third year of this war. Where where do you get a sense of where this is going, and how do a lot of the Ukrainian people feel about it? Because I know that's really hard to separate from sometimes this, us Americans get wound up in everything, right? But there's the facts and reality that you're in right there versus everywhere else that we're not involved in. You know what I mean?
No, it's such a big war that I think that everybody who has their eyes even halfway open is involved to a certain extent. What happens here is going to have at least some influence on the way that things develop in the United States in a lot of ways, although it's certainly not critical, but I mean, it's a big war. And there's a lot of equipment and a lot of people, and it's just too small for anybody to ignore completely. Um, the Ukrainians are watching the American politics very closely. And I'll sort of split this into two sides. From the official Ukrainian side, that is how the government is positioning itself, what kind of public statements they're making. They're trying to be America's very best friend. They're
Yeah.
trying to message, you want us to talk about a ceasefire? Glad to talk. You think that, we need to make some concessions? We are glad to talk about concessions. You think that we need to work more with the Europeans and less with the Americans? Definitely. You think that the Americans have put a lot into the country, and and you Ukrainians should be grateful. We are so grateful, and that's sort of the message. And none of it is dishonest, but that's the public message. Internally, and I've talked to some of these guys, they're a lot more critical of the Americans, and just because they are critical of everybody, but it's sort of a question of degree because they save their real hostility for the Russians.
Yeah.
And it's more on the level of irritation. A couple of, I guess last week it was, President Trump, probably just off the cuff, said that, yeah, America, they put in $200 billion into Ukraine, too much. Well, that's part of
Quite.
that's factually inaccurate. It's easy to prove that it's factually inaccurate. And, okay, the president said it. It's the domestic media, fine. But that stuff gets picked up in Ukraine. And if it like, no, it's just like nobody pays attention to states, it's big news. It's big news here. Trump lied about, about how much, and then they'll corner Zelensky and say, so really how much? And Zelensky, he's an elected official.
What's
If
some of
he
the facts?
lies, he'll get called on it too. Says, well, actually, our count sort of $60 billion, and that sort of matches the Pentagon numbers. And so the Ukrainians, I think, understand well that big countries, I think that they've got an example, that big countries will not put Ukraine's interests first. That's just not how big countries work. I don't think they take it personally. I mean, they are very much heartened when a country seems to really be enthusiastic about supporting Ukraine. That is not just for internal political, but just because of their national DNA. For instance, the British, I would say, for some reason, you can go into it, but for some reason, the British seem to be really, both parties, both sides across the political spectrum. They think that stopping the Russians and supporting Ukraine is something that should be done. And the Ukrainians perceive that, but they're not going to okay, so does this mean the British are going to save us? No. In terms of the mood of the country, they've been at war for 3 years.
Yeah.
It's been worse. And
Yeah.
the thing that's most visible to them, you're talking about the population across the board, is that everybody outside Ukraine. In Ukraine was promising the winter is going to be a disaster. Everybody's going to sit in their apartments. The Russian bombardment is going to take out the power grid. Didn't happen.
Didn't
Didn't come
happen.
close to happening. There's a lot of reasons for that, and and so that's this whole. That's a very interesting discussion on the level of how the Germans, for instance, for a long time during World War II, resisted Allied bombardment, but eventually succumbed to it. And the other thing is that the Ukrainians, again, on the civilian level, they're seeing a Ukrainian drone back to drones, or a Ukrainian drone bombardment already having real effect in Russia, because you can see it in the market prices of oil. You can see it in all of the local media. And of course, the Russian internet is absolutely visible to the Ukrainians. There is zero language barrier. It's like the difference between Canada and the United States. I mean, just whatever they post, you can go see. And so they can see people, in Krasnodar, God damn it, the Ukrainians blew up our oil refinery again. That wasn't happening a year ago. If you go to the front line, if you go to the front line, it really depends
a
on
long time ago why they weren't going after that kind of stuff. Like there's the river delta when you go and like see Azov, when you follow those rivers up there, that's like the Mississippi for Russia.
yeah.
And there's a lot of strategic targets in there. And then you've got
It's like then it's like I was talking to an air defense guy and he says or no, a drone strike guy, and he says I mean Russia's the biggest country in the world, but that also means that they have the biggest airspace in the world to defend.
Yeah.
It's like it's a technical problem. And I would just finish up on what's the mood. It really depends on who you talk to. If you talk to a unit that's not well commanded, you'll basically everything that you want to ever hear from a soldier who's planning the desert, you'll hear. Well, I'm not supplied. My officers are bad. I'm being used as cannon fodder. I want out. I just been put here to die. You go to one of the units that are well commanded, and it's like talking to American Marines. There's the enemy. We're going to kill them. We just let us loose. So it's like that's across the map.
Yeah. And I'll ask a couple of map questions in a few minutes, and then we'll pause to let some others ask some of their own questions too. One of the questions I had for you is, as someone who has your former intel background, when you look at what's going on here in Ukraine and you see all of this firsthand like this, have you thought, or do you know if there's people who are maybe looking at lessons learned from this conflict that we can then carry over and apply to help some of our other allies like Taiwan better prepare themselves, better porcupine their country up, so that way they become enough of a deterrent now before an invasion, so they don't have to go through this same situation? Because that was the issue with Ukraine. Was there wasn't enough arming of the country beforehand to really make them, a porcupine. And when it looked vulnerable, someone took a bite. And right now the situation is, are we doing enough with Taiwan to help prepare them and keep them ready? Plus just learning from our own selves, like what are we seeing in this war that we can apply for future conflicts so we don't fall prey to something like this ourselves? Because I'm not too confident, 100% about our outcome in a future conflict if we don't learn the lessons of the present and what we're seeing in Ukraine. You know what I mean?
Well, I sort of have a standard answer to something like that, and it goes like this. At the outset of the war, guys like me were more in demand from like the big media publications, the BBCs and the CBSs. And I wound up on some, and this is like in April 2022 or something like that. And I wound up on, some, I forget who, but some big American network. And this very intelligent, reporter from there said, "So, Stefan, what do you think? What do the Ukrainians need to be able to hold up to the Russians?" And my background, I was an officer in the United States Army, and I forgot to mention I spent 5 years working for the OSCE patrolling the Donbass area. So a lot of the ground where this fighting is going on, I have driven it to death. And and then talking to like soldiers on both sides, and it's like as a knee-jerk reaction was, well, the first thing you got to do is get the Ukrainians to develop small unit leaders, and that's especially sergeants, but
Thank you.
lieutenants and captains too. And it wasn't a reflective answer. And in retrospect, the answer that reporter was looking for was, send the TACMs, send, I don't know, aircraft carriers, whatever it was. He was thinking in terms of hardware. And that was my reaction then, and it remains my reaction today. I mean, everything is great. I mean, the all weapon system, I mean, and this is platitudes, right? But all weapon systems are effective, and Americans, they produce really good stuff. Some of it's kind of expensive, but but a lot of it is good, and some of it's very good. The secret sauce, the magic thing, the stuff, the thing that has to exist before anything else is an effective chain of command where you have effective small unit leadership in battle. And I've been on the front line enough, although not a lot. I'm not just, I didn't read that in a book. Actually, yeah, it's really like that. You need people to take initiative. You need people to take risks. You need people who know when it's time to like not follow the rules necessarily, but try and get a result. You need people to make that decision. Okay, today we're going to push the mission, but tomorrow I'm going to protect my guys. And it's small unit leadership. And that does not happen overnight. And so, Taiwan, if you pick me up and put me in Taiwan, the first thing I would look at before anything else, I would try and figure out how, what are the relationships like at the battalion level and lower? What are the small unit leaders like? Because that will define everything else.
Yeah.
If you're talking about lessons learned overall from the Ukrainian point of view, yeah, oh, they're doing it like crazy, but they're fighting a war. So they're not like trying, okay, this is our best solution. They're still experimenting. They are still trying to figure out what's the best way to get at the Russians. If you go, for instance, if you take, for instance, the tactical drone, there have been, like, is it just like a whole bunch of guys in vans, everybody's operating on his own? Is it centrally controlled? Is it tied into the rear area support guys, like the reconnaissance and electronic warfare guys? Are they like mortars? I mean, there was no textbook for this. There was no script for, how to do it. So in that particular category, the Ukrainian solution seems to have been, we are going to develop battalion and now even regimental and brigade size formations that effectively work like artillery on the battlefield, but
Yeah.
they're drones. And they perform reconnaissance. So they find their own targets. They plug into the fire direction networks. So they work with the artillery. They are assigned sectors. And if you talk to some of the leaders in this kind of this part of the war, and you were to say, okay, so what have you learned from this? The answer is, well, my expectation is that if this particular military technology continues, then eventually what you're going to get is a war zone where there's going to be a gray zone or a dead area, a kill zone that's going to be somewhere between 3 and 15 kilometers wide. And stepping out into the open there is death or something like death because the drone density will be so high. And movement, advance through that zone is going to depend exactly on the degree to which one side achieves air superiority with the drones. So, what's the lessons learned? Well, that's now theory. That's what a guy who's in that business, who's doing that, thinks that the future is going to be. So, but, it's like, have they sat down and figured that out? No. So, the best that, anybody who does that, the reviewing for a living, the best that you can do is talk to as many people as possible and draw your own conclusions, because I mean the war is not over, it's still developing.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question real quick on a couple areas on the map, and then we'll open it up and start going through some of these questions for everyone because I know they have some questions. And I want to make sure we share time for that. Let me see. Let me pull this one up here. All right, so I think everyone can see. What the heck? I think everyone should be able to see this, right? So Can you all see this? Everyone fine with that?
Yeah, trying to
Okay.
reckon.
Okay. I can pull it back out here so you have a bit more of a reference here. So, um, I can pull it up again. So I'm
Was
really,
that okay? I got it. Okay, I'm oriented now. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm trying to look down into this area here and then up in this pocket up here. And so what have you heard much about what's happening through here with this pincer here? There are a lot of I've seen this kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah, that's the Karakova pocket. Yeah, sure. I mean, I've talked to guys. I've been sort of to the, I mean, a couple of, like a month and a half ago, I was to the east end of the map that you're showing, for a short period of time. And I went no further east because I was not. Okay, so what you're looking at is the Karakova sector. And what the Ukrainians, I guess, operational approach has been since about the beginning of 2023, when the president, our army commander, a guy by the name of Alexander Syrskyi, took over, was that there was a conscious decision made to effectively fight the Russians with attrition, to not attack unless the odds were really stacked on the Ukrainian side, and there were some anomalies, but in general, that was the strategy. And excuse me, the beginning of 2024, I misspoke. And the goal of the strategy, the objective, is to kill as many Russian soldiers as possible. If not kill them, then wound them. It's
about
just make them pay with blood. And if there is a choice between uh, giving up ground or losing X number of soldiers that could be used to fight later, then you pull the soldiers out. There's risk involved. There have been times when that operational approach has not worked, but by and large, you have not seen over the past year large amounts of Ukrainian soldiers killed or wounded or taken captive in an encirclement. So what you're looking at right there is effectively a fortified area that the Ukrainians have chosen to fight basically a mini Verdun, if you like.
yeah.
And their calculation is that they can kill the Russians faster on that particular ground than the Russians can come up with people to attack. Um, the way that the Russians attack these days is part of that calculation. If they had uh, full scale, combined arm, the capacity to make major full scale combined arms attacks, perhaps that Ukrainian approach wouldn't work, but effectively they don't. So as you can see, there's a river running through that
Yeah.
sector, and the Ukrainians are just exploiting that so that their front on which the Russians can attack is narrow. They take advantage of it, and effectively, when the Russians step out in the open, it's a question of how much firepower can the Ukrainians bring down on them.
Yeah.
And and the point that I would draw your attention to about the Karakova pocket is that
Mhm.
effectively the Ukrainians had held that thing for months. I mean, I forget exactly. It's like, since what, March or something like that. People have been pointing at that pincers that maybe will close, and the Ukrainians are still holding it. It's a conscious decision to draw Russians out into the open and kill them. It's a risky approach, and it
Yeah.
eventually will get. It has over the past 3 months. I think the Russians have advanced where you're looking something like 10 kilometers, maybe. And I don't know offhand how much terrain they've captured, but certainly they've gained ground. And the question is, at what price, and can they
Yeah.
sustain that price?
Yeah. And I think one of the questions some of us have also looked at and seen too is I understand the perspective that you just outlined. I think that is a sound perspective to look at and approach to implement. On the other side though, too, if I was to red cell this and look at it from an adversarial perspective, if I can create an environment though where you're doing this kind of a tactic, and and I'm willing to sacrifice people, I could keep that thing kind of going a long time to where I can basically attrit what resources you have and people to keep it alive and keep it going while you just think you're, kind of lulling you into a false belief that this is actually going to hold and work. But in reality, I'm just sucking everything you possibly got into this one area here and that prevents you from countering me somewhere else or in another spot or punch
Yeah.
some back in another area. You know what I mean? Because resources are
Yeah, no, no,
finite.
no. That's that is absolutely valid, and it's happening. And the key question is to what degree? Do the Ukrainians have sufficient resources to make a major offensive and, let's say, try and capture all of Kursk Oblast in Russia? Obviously not. Do they have sufficient resources to grab a small chunk? Yeah, they have that. Have the Russians sustained sufficient casualties so that they have an across the board uh, break of morale? No, that's not happened.
Yeah.
Have some units mutinied? Yeah, we've seen that. Is it a trend? Well, see, it's a war. That stuff is really hard to predict. So on the strategic level, it's a battle of attrition by both sides,
Yeah.
and the Ukrainians are defending their land, so they have a morale advantage.
Yeah.
The
We'll always
firepower
lose
has
more
just
on
about
offense than we
equalized,
do on
but they
defense.
don't have the manpower, or they
Yeah.
don't, or more exactly, the Russians have manpower numbers, but there's the question of skill. What you can, what I mean, this now I'm going to sort of like what before it was, yeah, this is pretty much accepted. Now I'm going to start speculating a little bit. One of the things that I am seeing, and lots of people have seen this as well, is that the Russians seem to have a real tendency to basically burn out units completely. That
Yeah.
when a unit goes into combat, I mean, this is well documented. It gets wiped out over time. I mean, there aren't cases where men are walking out and then you'll have, like, a battle of the Somme and 1,000 guys are dead in the course of a few hours. But over, let's say, a week or
Well, it's
two or
maybe
three or
months.
four, entire battalions are just written off. The Ukrainians, although not as well, are doing a better job in retaining a cadre and soldiers within at least some of their units, so that some of the units are getting better. That's I can name them again. I'm not alone. So if the question is how's the attrition battle going, you can make the argument that over time what's happening is that the fighting ability of Ukrainian units will has improved relative to Russian units, and it will continue to improve. So, given equivalent levels of firepower over time, the attrition battle should go against the Russians. That's sort of a logical extension based on the speculation that over time, Ukrainian combat efficiency globally is improving. Was that enough to overcome the manpower shortages? Good question. But my point would be that that's one of the things that's in play.
Yeah. And this other sector up in here, Pacross, I think is, yeah. How what have you heard's been going on with this one? Because we've been watching for a couple of weeks now. They've been really making a lot of gains on this side here, and then they've pushed here, but now they're starting to push up around it. Again, it kind of looks like they're trying to get back circled around there to create another encirclement type.
Yeah, the Russian operational approach is very well established. What they prefer they know that the Ukrainians uh, objective tactically is to try and get into a position where the Russians must attack them and the Ukrainians have higher ground, good observation, and firepower and fortifications. And the Russian solution to that repeatedly has been, okay, if we have no alternative, yes, we'll attack that head on. But what we very much would prefer is to attack the supply route into that fortified area. And so what you are seeing in the southern face of the Pokrovsk Bulge is a very slow, gradual, step-by-step, and pretty bloody Russian offensive to place the road that runs from Pokrovsk to, well, eventually back to Zaporizhia and so on, under fire, so that supply is not possible. Now, this is not, the desert.
Yeah.
Observation is not perfect. Supply can get through a lot, but I mean that's the Russian intent, And yes, the Russians have been advancing, however, from from the perspective of quantity of attacks. In fact, over the past, I guess, since the second half of January, the quantity of Russian attacks has fallen off, by about what, 30%, 40%, something like that. What does
Yeah.
that mean? Bad weather, running out of people. Russia's about to surrender. The Ukrainians now have overwhelming firepower. It's, who knows?
Nobody knows. Could be
But
building up for another big push somewhere else at some
also
the rest of the
possible.
month.
But what I can tell you is that I talked to a guy who's deployed out in the area just the other day. The general opinion of the Ukrainian soldiers, this dude told me, was, nah, okay, well, the Russians maybe can get up to the fortifications of Pokrovsk, maybe. I mean, if they're willing to like go field by field, field by field, and they were willing to take the casualties to over the next couple of months. But actually, to take that, it's a really built up area, Pokrovsk, and
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
there's high rises, and it's a in this war, it's a good defensive area. The general opinion is they just do not have the manpower. They don't to take it. It is not. It's just it's absurd to assert that if you're seeing little groups of 2 or 3 or 5 guys slowly making incremental advances over a week or 2 or 3 weeks, that somehow this can translate to a massive mini assault on Berlin style of assault on Pokrovsk.
I think it'll be like that. Anything here is going to be a very slow attritional grind.
Yeah,
And
so I mean, who knows? I mean, it's like the Ukrainians are less likely to have a global break in morale, but they're not immune. And we reporters watch this stuff very, very closely. It doesn't seem like the Ukrainians are taking unacceptable casualties all along the line. I mean, there's plenty of open media, and medics who blog and soldiers who don't care about security rules and so on. So probably if there was a big problem, a guy like me would spot it. And we're not seeing it, but could be that there's a lot of casualties and the Ukrainian army is doing a better job of concealing them. Well, you can't be sure, but it looks like the Russians they're not completely out of steam, but they just do not have the oomph to do something big.
yeah,
That's the way it looks.
the operations that they've been running up in the Kursk area, what do you think they're trying to achieve with that? I mean, I understood the initial shock value to go in and hit. I kind of thought it was going to be much more of a maneuver, like almost like a raid to just punch through, go in there, hit like a major supply area, a rail section, trash the whole thing up, rip up the lines, and then kind of roll back out. Not, let's anchor ourselves in here and plug it out
Yeah,
for
yeah.
5 minutes.
Well, you're not alone. There are a bunch of Ukrainian soldiers and officers who basically said exactly that. Um, the the official position of the Ukrainian general staff is we are holding part of Russia because better to if there's going to be a big firepower battle, flattening buildings and chasing civilians out of their homes and generally ruining everything, better on Russian territory than our territory. It is a given that should the war come to the point of trading territory, this
Bow,
is
bow.
it's a bargaining chip. Good. Um, it is consistent with the General Syrski's apparent. Well, he's not expressed it specifically, but this is the way it looks. His strategy of trying to place the Ukrainian military in a position where it can kill lots of Russians without taking
As many.
unacceptable casualties itself. And certainly, uh, the Russians have tried harder to kick the Ukrainians out of Kursk region than they have, for instance, to kick their Ukrainians out of territory around Kursk. I mean, at the end of the day, 10,000 or 11,000 North Koreans, they didn't get deployed to Pokrovsk, they got deployed to Kursk.
Yeah.
And the calculation I'm pretty sure is, if we move in and then, wire ourselves in, dig ourselves in, and then the Russians have to come at us, then, well, the Russians have to come at us. And I'm not sure that it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Okay, let me exit off of the map here for a second and
Well, there's a lot of people.
some of these
Wow.
questions
Hi,
for the.
guys. Yeah.
All right, so let's see here. Let me go and ooh, let's see, Rudy, you had a question. I think you were one of the first I was asking. We'll go to Rudy and then we'll go to what is it? To Devin. Deva, we'll ask that. We'll let him go next and after that.
Oh, yes, my question was, what is the impact tactically, strategically, politically of Syria's change in terms of access for military purposes, as well as just the overall sense of like who's where, who's the enemy, where are they, and what kind of support can we get?
I don't think that the Ukrainians are betting on much support. They have a pretty good understanding of what the Russians have in or had now in Syria. It's like most of it's on a ship right now. And we've seen for years how the Russians have taken far-flung garrisons, in the Far East and the Arctic and so on, and they weren't ever supposed to be in a conventional war, and they got thrown into the war in Ukraine. So they've looked pretty closely, and okay, there's a couple of air defense batteries that might be useful for the scale. Okay, it's a factor, but it's not a big one. So mostly the effect is morale, because the Ukrainians, unlike a lot of people, had a very good sense of how this little country got screwed by a big country, and specifically, at least in the Ukrainians' mind, Russia. And they just the Ukrainians were just livid that Vladimir Putin, and again, I'm not trying to be a Ukrainian propaganda person, just their mindset. The Vladimir Putin, he wasn't, he couldn't limit his evil just to the former Soviet Union. He had to go and do evil things in Syria too. Look how evil this guy is, and they are, I think, gratified, and to a certain extent, maybe they're a little bit pumped up in morale, in that the fact that Syria was being beaten up and blown up, the siege of Aleppo and how it got leveled was very well covered here in the news, and that the Syrians could, at the end of the day, get their country back. In the Ukrainian mindset from the Russians, I mean, they know that the Syrians, it was a corrupt government, which the Ukrainians in their past have had a lot of experience with too. So it's for them, it's a great thing to see. It's the kind of idea, well, yeah, okay, there is hope in the world, but in terms of practical, not really. I mean, there's zero expectation in Ukraine. Oh yeah, okay, so now that the Americans aren't necessarily going to be involved in Syria, they'll help us more. No, that's not something the Ukrainians, even in their like craziest fantasies, are thinking about.
Well, they have a couple of access points that the Russians have been denied in terms of Mediterranean and air base. I didn't know if that made any particular difference from this.
No, no. I mean the air base, it's covered in very great detail here, but that air base and the sea base in Tartus, at least as it is presented here in the media, was primarily for Russia, outside of Syria, a hub for moving what the Ukrainians call mercenaries, this Wagner group, but Russians who are not necessarily regular army, to operations and things that the Russians are doing in Africa. And over the last year and a half, actually, the Ukrainian Special Forces guys have gone after some of these Wagner guys, at least if you believe the Ukrainian Special Forces guys. And the thinking is that Ukrainian Special Forces guys won't be in as many engagements in future in Africa, because there won't be Russians, because there'll be less Russians. But that's sort of like, a little marginal thing, just minor news items. In the grand scheme of things, mostly it's just, look, see, the Syrians got their country back. They didn't give up. They got their country back. And so there's a bit of hope there.
Good, thank
Let's see, another question at butcher your name, I'm sorry. Deva, why don't you go ahead, unmute and ask your question, and then we'll work our way down. I think we'll get to, I think, Rob, you asked a question about morale. If you heard it earlier, it might have been answered. If not, we can re-ask it again. And then we'll get to James Crow, and then down to Eric Spittle. All right, go ahead, Devin.
Oh yeah, hey, thanks so much. My question or questions is will Putin ever want to end this war, or is this a strategy to stay in power until he dies? And if so, are we going to see Xi Jinping do the same in like 3 years' time?
Well,
And as,
yeah.
as a PS, are we going to see a coup in Russia this summer?
I can't now. I mean, no, I doubt we're going to see a coup in Russia unless Putin's health fails. Then all bets are off. Um, he's his control of the country is not perfect. There are cracks, but he's like the guy who's got more control than anybody else. Um, the Pretty much the general opinion is that if one looks at things logically, the best move for Putin is to keep the war going as long as possible, provided that it doesn't break up his regime. Because if the war continues, there's always the chance that the West will stop supporting Ukraine, or that Ukraine might just get sick of it and surrender, and then Russia achieves its aims. Or if and but you know, that's sort of pretty unlikely. And if there is a peace, but as long as there's a war going on, then it's very easy to mobilize society and control society if you're sitting in the Kremlin. If there is a peace, then even if Russia wins, then the Russian economy is expected to implode, because all of that war manufacturing is effectively being done on credit, and soaking up the national sovereign fund and stuff like that. So there's an argument that goes that what is most in Putin's interest is a continuing war for as long as possible, until such time. And it seems like the most logical objective for him is to draw it out as long as he can until somebody gets tired. Uh, as far as what the Chinese might do, uh, no, I'm not going to try. It's not my job. I don't know about that.
Thanks so much.
Great. All right, let's go to the next person then. I think that was, well, I think I recall. I think it was Rob here, or
Yeah, I can take that, Robert. How is Ukrainian morale? The civilian population is they're kind of like, they're gritting their teeth. They're tired. They're like, how much of this do we have to put up with? They're not going to quit. They are. But they gripe, and they're sort of like, they're just like this. It's like, if I'm from Texas, and if you're in Texas during the summer, it's like, when is the summer going to end? I mean, Jesus, how long can this heat go on? And in a simple way, that's kind of like a reasonable description of Ukrainian civilian morale. Um, if you're talking to the soldiers, the fighting men, it really depends on the unit. I mean, it really depends on what they're doing and how effective they are. Now, you talk to like a drone unit, right? These guys, they want to go kill more Russians. They know they are winning. They feel like they have the bad guys on the run. They have the very best, little drone section in the entire Ukrainian army. War is actually kind of fun. Okay, people get hurt, but I mean, I've never done anything like this in my life that I've been so good at, and I'm good at this. Our drones, I mean, the Russians, they can't come out in the open. You talk to like an officer in one of the better brigades. I've got great soldiers. We're defending our country. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. You talk to a soldier who's just been thrown into a unit where the chain of command sucks. I'm just cannon fodder, and I want out of here as fast as I can. And I mean, it's like I was using the metro in Kyiv today. And you go past would drop down to the metro station. There were cops standing there checking guys' documents. And the standard procedure is that the reason they're doing that is because there aren't enough people, young men or older men even, to volunteer to go fight. So they send out the police to check people's documents. And if somebody hasn't registered for the draft, then they get thrown into the draft. They could potentially get thrown into the draft pool. So that's the morale. Now, what it means long term, it's hard to say. but that's, sort of where do you look at it?
Yeah, I think James Crow, I think you were up next, and then we'll move down our list here.
Hey, James, how you
Hi.
doing, buddy?
Yeah, not too bad, buddy. How are you? Bro, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you great.
Yeah, we hear you.
Brilliant. Bro, the question I've got is, of course, with Trump now in office in the US, one of his plans is to try and end the war in Ukraine within his first 100 days in term. Do Ukrainians think that's realistic?
No,
Do they think that?
no, no.
There we go, I suppose.
Go ahead.
So I'm guessing you probably can answer my question now anyway, but I'm guessing Ukrainians now more just in it for the long haul. They don't see this war ending in the next 1 or 2 years. They think it's just going to carry on until Putin dies.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. They're hopeful in the sense that strange things can happen. The fact that the Russians invaded in the first place was just a huge shock, because from the Ukrainian perspective, the thinking was they have to know we'll fight. They have to know that we're going to resist. And even if they roll over the country, this is the mindset at at the outset of the invasion. Even if they overrun the country, there's going to be a partisan war. It's obvious. I mean, so how could the Russians be so stupid as to do that? Well, the way that major nations make decisions are not always perfectly thought out. They don't always take into account sort of the facts on the ground. And so I think with that kind of background, the Ukrainians look at the future. Well, we can't really predict what comes next perfectly. There have been a lot of unexpected things that have happened. Nobody at the start of the war thought that we would still be here 3 years later. It's pretty clear 3 years later, we're holding the Ukrainian mindset. We're holding our ground, and we're actually incrementally hurting the Russians more than we used to be. So, maybe that'll change things. So, and if you say, well, yeah, but are you willing to live in a country at war for the next 2 years? You'll get a response like, oh, God forbid, or, maybe I have to move to Poland or something like that. I don't even want to think about it.
Okay, we'll get to you in a second, Vince. There's one more person ahead of you, then we'll go back over to you. I think you'll be next in line then anyway. So, Eric Spittle, you had a question, 1 or 2 questions you wanted to ask. So go ahead, let you ask your question. We'll hear Stefan's response.
Should I be reading the question, or somebody going to say it?
He posted it. We could probably go back up here and find it again. I was gonna let him
Okay.
know.
Now, great question. Fall of Syria took that. Hostility. Not sure what is the. Okay, how about what has happened at the personal level between ethnic Russians and Ukrainians? That's a fantastic question. Russian speakers who Ukrainian supported, those who only speak Russian, discuss between families and the work and church everywhere else. And what does this portend for the post-war period? To come? That is a
That's me,
fantastic
Stefan.
question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't quite get that. This was my question, but thank you so much. Please.
That is a hell of a question.
Great question.
And it's and it like you'll have to shut me down on this one, because I could talk for days. I speak Russian. I speak maybe not absolutely Pravda TAS level Russian, but I speak Russian fluently. I have zero language barrier. I can express myself grammatically as an educated person in Russian, and I've been doing it for a long time in this country. And I have lived through the transition of this country from, most people speak Russian, especially educated people, to actually, in polite society, probably we shouldn't be speaking Russian. I mean, everybody understands that not everybody speaks Ukrainian. And I mean, having been in the society for, many years, I understand Ukrainian. I read Ukrainian. I work in Ukrainian. I can make, I can say phrases in Ukrainian, but I can't speak like an educated person. And in that sense, I'm a lot like a percentage of the population. How big that percentage is, nobody knows. Nobody wants to say. It's all speculation. And there's millions and millions and millions of people who are some degree of like that. Nobody, yeah, okay, all Ukrainians are bilingual, but also none of them are perfectly bilingual. And and how do you work that out? Well, I mean, the really short answer to your question is probably already too long, but the really short answer to your question is that nobody can figure it out. So it gets worked out on a case by case basis every single time there's like a face-to-face conversation between two people whose understanding of both languages isn't exactly the same. There's a little bit of like, okay, so what language are we going to speak? I was, for instance, this morning, I'm getting a painting crew to come in and paint an apartment. My brother-in-law was there. My brother-in-law, he grew up speaking Ukrainian, so he was speaking Ukrainian. I was speaking Russian. He and I have spoken like that, the same, because he doesn't speak English. We don't even pay attention. Now this painter, a lady shows up, and she's from the country outside of Kiev, and she's a little bit younger, but not much. And now, so what she's now got this American speaking Russian and this guy from Kiev, he's a businessman, speaking Ukrainian. And what was her solution in that situation? She would turn to my brother-in-law, talk to him in Ukrainian, turn to me, and she talked to me in Russian. And the Ukrainians do not have a solution. They just, I mean, it's not like it's unsolvable. I mean, sure, the Swiss have dealt with it, the Finns have dealt with it, and all that stuff. But the Ukrainians they're not to the point where they can really think about that. They've got more serious, like tense issues that require a lot of debate and parliamentary work and so on. So they just sort of like, we'll get to that at some point. The general sort of like in society rule at this point in time is try not to be a jerk and try not to demand that anybody speak a language to suit you. And the other thing that I would say is that the general rule that, if you want to be polite, you should probably start a conversation out in Ukrainian. I do that too. I mean, just to sort of not be a jerk. I'll go into the store and I'll speak some Ukrainian, and then we see how the conversation goes. But once you get to the front line among the soldiers, nobody cares. I mean, it's literally, it's kind of like me and my brother-in-law. It's just like, what language you use, it's like, that's not important anymore.
Okay, Stefan, thank you very much. Just to follow up very quickly on your answer. So if language is not a marker for a political stance at a person-to-person level, what about a predominantly ethnic Russian community that perhaps is adjacent to a predominantly ethnic Ukrainian community?
Really short answer is no. The way that the Ukrainians look at it is that, they don't really care. Like, what language you speak is really not a big deal. Is this person a lazy alcoholic? Is this person a worthwhile person? And if you have, I mean, it's like you don't have villages next to that like it's mixed. One Russian and one Ukrainian. You have streets. I mean, it's just you have families, and it's for people who speak Russian. It's kind of irritating to like, oh God, okay, so I have to fill out the form in Ukrainian. This is kind of like, why can't I grew up speaking Russian, my son is out fighting. But you don't see people getting out in the street and waving flags and saying, leave us alone. We just want to speak Russian because, real Russia attacked. My wife, who is Ukrainian, who grew up speaking Ukrainian, and with whom we mostly speak English, from time to time, I will say, listen, it's like, why can't Ukraine just be like Switzerland? Let everybody know everything, make all the languages legal. Make it so that Russian is a legal, like a language of record in Ukraine, and it'll be fine. And she's an educated woman, university and so forth. And she, the moment I open my mouth and put that forward to her as an outsider, she'll say that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Everybody should speak Ukrainian. And I said, well, what about people who speak Russian? She said they should learn. And everybody's got their own opinion, but what my wife or a person like her would never do is go into a store and demand that this person stop speaking Russian. She might like, I've seen it happen. She'll like, that person was speaking Russian. It really irritates me. But when you're in your family complaining, that's different from an open confrontation on the street. So, it ain't going to get fixed soon. That's for sure.
Appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Vince, you're up next. We got Vince Rump. He's got a question he's waiting in line for, so we'll go with you now. You unmute yourself, then you'll be able to ask it there.
Okay, I think I got it. How's that?
That's great, Vince. Nice to talk to you.
I'm going to finish up that other book, and then we can start fleshing out the armament personnel on them other ships later. My question is, and this is a question that a lot of Americans have. We have sent Ukraine over $150 billion. And to me personally, as a veteran myself, I see no way in a military fashion, Ukraine winning anything. It's not going to happen. Much as you would like it to, much as I would like to see it happen, it's not going to happen. Why should we keep throwing money down a hole that this country does not have?
Good question. The short answer is that I would challenge the $150 billion number. And if you want after this, send me a link or get in touch with me, and I'll send you some background information. My take on that as a guy sitting here, and it's my job to track the information, but I am fallible, is that $150 billion number is inflated by at least a factor of 2. That being said, the American assistance to Ukraine has been significant. It has been very useful. A couple of pieces of that assistance are critical. As I sit here in Kyiv, there is an American Patriot battery, at least one, probably 2, somewhere within, I don't know, 5 or 10 kilometers where I'm sitting. And if the Russians decide to shoot a ballistic missile at the city of Kyiv, then the city of Kyiv is protected because only by thanks to American technology, military technology, because the only weapon system that can intercept a Russian ballistic missile in this war is a Patriot. That's it. And you take that away, then there's a vulnerability that opens up. Is it a vulnerability that would is it a vulnerability that would cause a collapse of morale and force a Ukrainian surrender? Different discussion. Are American M1 tanks miles ahead of every other tank that's on the battlefield? Can't say that. The British Challengers are just as good. The German Leopard, I've talked to soldiers who've told me actually Leopards are better because they're easier to maintain, but that's what soldiers say. Whether or not the United States should support Ukraine is, a sovereign decision of the United States. And I don't think you'll ever find a Ukrainian who says that America owes Ukraine anything. But what you will find is Ukrainians who will say something along the lines of, America has stood for democracy a long time. During the Afghan War, during the Vietnam War, look at the Ukrainians, read history. The Americans were constantly complaining about people who wouldn't fight for democracy and freedom. Here we are fighting for democracy and freedom. Kind of a little strange that some Americans don't seem to think that our Ukrainian democracy is worth supporting. And it's not really with the grudge. It's not really with, and therefore you should just give us a lot of money. It's rather just the sort of the logical thread, and whether following the image of America to its logical conclusion, because they feel that they are a democracy. They feel that they are fighting a militaristic, fascistic dictatorship. They are fighting for their homes. I mean, they are people who picked up guns to defend their families. So, why should America support that? Well, then you get into, to what degree should America be involved in geopolitical security and stability in Eastern Europe? And
I think
that's
Well,
and
we're
I think what,
we're getting tired of getting dragged into Europe's wars.
yeah, I
Plain
think,
and simple.
yeah. I mean,
At least that's my opinion.
no, it's a very, you know, you can argue all day, but the fact is that that's not just your opinion, Vince. There are lots of people who think that way in the United States, and you know, those people, you know, it's like America's democracy. So, you know, what the democracy decides is what the democracy should do.
I
I
think
don't think that.
like in answering part of that question too, I think what has really kind of harmed or hurt the willingness at this, like this far into it, obviously, to kind of support and want to fight that is a lot of us spent years in Iraq and Afghanistan fighting those conflicts. And there was nothing more frustrating that we experienced than fighting these conflicts and not being allowed to win. And I think what has really like caused a lot of people to kind of question things going on in Ukraine is for a while it's like, all right, we're going to help these guys, we're going to defend democracy, we're going to give them weapons, we're going to help them. You know, we made a commitment to help, you know, protect these guys when they gave up their nuclear weapons and so on, whatever. Where they got into trouble though was when it became an idea of, well, let's just kill a bunch of Russians and not necessarily give them the tools to win. So we give them a lot of equipment, a lot of munitions and weapons and expertise, but we're not actually giving them the tools they need to really win this fight. We're just giving them the tools to not lose quickly. And a lot of veterans see that, and it's not that they're against a war or against supporting Ukraine. They're against dumb wars and they're against not being allowed to win because we've been
I get that. I get that absolutely. And you know, I'm an American. I'm a veteran, and I've actually been under fire. And oh, I didn't mention I spent some time in Afghanistan. Not a lot, but I did some, you know, reporting work in Afghanistan. And I'm a history buff. And without trying to Vince is yeah, without trying to like try and make you Vince think my way, just me sitting here, I you know I can't see this is a good fight. This is not the same as Afghanistan. This is not the same. I wasn't in Iraq, but I've talked to enough people, and you know, if there ever was a fight that is righteous, it's got to be this one. Again, not to try and convince anybody else to think my way, just sort of like how I see it. And as regards American assistance, this is going to sound really, really nitpicking and really ungrateful. And just again, I'm an American and I'm like trying to look at this from a historical point of view. The scale of this war is so big that the American assistance, substantial though it wasn't decisive, and it really, I'm not going to say it was, it's not, it would be incorrect to call it insignificant, but to call it massive by the scale of this war, no. I mean, it's like the Americans have provided, I think it's the number is something on the order of 500 armored personnel carriers, which is a lot, right? But you know, you can go through 100 armored personnel carriers in like 2 days. The Russians managed to do it. Now, this is not to say that this means that the only possible solution is for the Americans to gear up, you know, put people to, you know, get rid of habeas corpus, start an American work economy, and make all of American industry pump weapons into Ukraine. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that, yeah, okay, from compared to the scale of money that the Americans put into Afghanistan, for instance, on a year-by-year basis, the American commitment to Ukraine is huge. Compared to the scale of the war and the amount of firepower and weaponry that has been deployed here and that is getting destroyed here, okay, the American commitment is, well, I mean, just it wasn't decisive, that we can say for sure. So the question is, what is America's best strategy after that? And, you know, thankfully, America's a democracy. America will decide.
Did that kind of answer your question, Vince? Was there another specific one you wanted? Let's go over to Cole.
Well, the thing is he's skirting around. There is no way for Ukraine to win militarily. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. They're going to have to negotiate some sort of peace.
Well,
It's the
yeah,
only way
yeah,
it's going to
yeah,
end.
yeah, yeah. Vince, I basically agree with you, but you could have said the same thing about the Vietnamese, during the Vietnam War. You could
We
have said
didn't
the same
belong there
thing about
either.
you could have said the same thing about the Taliban, during when the Americans were in. You can say the same thing about the Mujahideen when the Soviets were in Afghanistan. So inability to obtain a decisive victory in a war is not the same thing necessarily, the Ukrainians would say, as not having any option but except to stop and cease hostilities. In some cases, fighting on is the most rational move. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, honestly. The Ukrainians are going to keep on fighting because what else are they supposed to do? I mean,
No,
okay,
they'll just keep on dying in large numbers. It's
Yeah,
stupid.
the alternative is
well,
they
yeah, but I mean, it's
surrender
their
and
country. I mean,
become part of Russia entirely.
the alternative is to surrender and become and start living in a police state. Where the police can take your kids away, where you can lose your property. I mean, it's their freedom. So I mean, they're going to fight for that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Cole, I think you had a question as well. I don't know, we quite got to yours, but if you've got some, go ahead and ask your next question. Oh, you're still muted, bottom left, unmute, there you go.
Mute.
Oh, thank you.
Perfect, there you go.
All right. I wanted you to reflect on the presence of North Koreans in this engagement.
Those poor guys.
In the
Yeah.
West, they're often reported as if they're just buffoons who die instantly and made no difference to Ukraine, but I can't believe that's quite the reality.
It's one of the
What are
things
they getting out
about
of it?
one of the things about this war is that pretty much every major unit has its own sort of like telegram channels, information feeds, and there's a lot of data out there and a lot of media out there. So if you are willing to do it, you can basically you can spend your entire day just looking at battle video, and not just battle video, but battle video that probably happened in the last 24 hours, if not the last 24, then the past 72. The amount, I mean, it's my job in part. I can't keep up with it all, right? So I do what everybody does. I pick certain units that I know are in contact, try and track them more closely. There are units that are in the Kursk sector, and it's just widely documented. And what it seems happened was that the Koreans really did not have any idea what it was like to go out into open terrain that was covered by Ukrainian FPV drones. And I mean, and the tactics that the Ukrainians have had a long, not and the Russians, the armies have had a long time to practice and get better with drone tactics. So, every clever thing that, might occur to you and me at some point has occurred to some Ukrainian soldier, and they've already put it in the act. And the stuff that sounded like a good idea but didn't work, they probably tested it and thrown it out. So the tactical drills that the defending force has to deny advance across open terrain is really sophisticated. And if there are even a reasonable amount of FPV drones available to the defender, it's really difficult to across open ground. You're going to get spotted, and you're going to get hunted, and then you're going to get killed or wounded. And if they put you in a vehicle, you'll go a bit further, but they'll drop a bomb on that, or they'll drop a mine in front of it and stop it that way. They put you they put you on a tank. Okay, that maybe takes more drones, but maybe they'll take or the drone will just attack the tank's track, stop it, and once it gets stopped, then they'll throw 5 or 10 drones at it. And the Russian soldiers and the Ukrainian soldiers, they know that it's incredibly dangerous to go out in the open in a large group, to stand around, to not conceal yourself under something that can't be seen by a thermal, so like get yourself underground, get yourself, I don't know, under a blanket with lots of leaves on it, whatever. You are not safe. The moment that you step out in the open within the range of drones, you are potentially not safe. And the closer you get to the other side, the higher the likelihood that a drone is going to come and hit you. And these guys apparently, it seems like they didn't have any idea that that was coming. And once they went to ground, it seems like the standard Ukrainian drills, then you bring in the mortars and the artillery. And, just cluster munitions are just, I mean, they just, I mean, the advertising, yeah, it's going to like kill everything in a square, I don't know, 500 meters or whatever it is. It seems like it really does. I mean, it's just again because there's no place to hide. The explosions take place, at about the level of a human head, and this seems to have been iterated over and over and over. I mean, I am still amazed that there are people out there that are willing to risk their lives attacking into that environment because it's just so lethal. That being said, we know that the Russians managed to get people to attack by isolating them, by telling them, well, we've got special stuff for you in this particular attack, or we've taken out the Ukrainian drones, whatever it is. And in a very and there's military discipline, and there's guys behind you with guns if you decide to run backwards. So yes, the Russians have developed institutions and systems so that they can keep pushing the people forward. But the Russians, you'll get Russian soldiers who will surrender. It seems like the North Koreans were, heavily propagandized. It also seems like that so they believe more in their mission. And also, there are some reports that they were special forces guys, right? Who therefore were selected, who therefore were more intensively trained. They probably were very good at Taekwondo. Didn't do them much good on the Ukrainian battlefield, but it was but from the point of view of giving those soldiers sufficient what's the word sufficient motivation to step out in the ocean, to take that risk, which just if you understand the battlefield, it's just like it's suicidal almost. Those guys in their groups, and they're isolated, right? They can't go talk to the Russians and hear the scuttlebutt about, no, really, it's like really dangerous here. And it seems like over the course of about 2 weeks, day after day and night after night, groups of North Koreans would step out, would try and go somewhere. And a couple of times they succeeded, actually. They captured a town. I forget what it was called, but I could look it up. But they captured a town, apparently took no Ukrainian prisoners, the Russians say. We haven't have a confirmation of that from the Ukrainian side. But, it's like any unit that is committed to combat, it seems like, in this war, inevitably suffers casualties. And it doesn't matter really how good the command is, or how good the tactics are, or how good the weapons are. The density of drones over the battlefield is so high that over time, casualties pile up. And the less drone conscious the soldiers are, so green soldiers, like that ancient thing about how a veteran soldier survives a lot longer because he's a veteran, and a green soldier, he's the new guy, he's the one who's most likely to die. This is textbook.
Luck
This is
of the
exactly
draw.
what's happening. Yeah.
What was your other question, Cole?
Yeah, quick follow-up on this. So first of all, thanks for spending time with us. This has been fantastically educational for me. I thought that drone jamming technology was not that unusual, but from what you're describing, it sounds like it's not a factor here.
Well,
Educate
again,
me.
no, yes, it is a factor. But jamming requires power.
Hmm.
And it has to, and so you need a big battery, or you need a generator, or you need something, and you got to produce the electricity. If it's big, then it will probably be seen and hit anyway. So I've seen pictures of tanks, and they've had like 4 jammers, each one supposedly strong enough to keep an FPV drone from hitting the tank. And there are 4 of these things on the tank, and drones took out the tank, right? So, what's the problem? Well, I'm not
Fiber
I'm not
optic wires is what they've done now. Now you have a
I'm not an
wire
expert, but in
guided
general,
drone.
the jammer, it would be ideal if the jammer was really effective at, 10, 15, 20, I don't know, 100 meters away from whoever, where the jammer is. But in fact, the jammer is most effective about 5 centimeters away, right? Because the closer you get, and these drones are not stationary. They're building some of them now, supposedly with artificial intelligence, which can lock in on a target, and sort of find the target itself. But that's sort of, it doesn't. I'm not seeing reports where that's happening all the time. But what I am seeing, and I've seen everybody's seeing this for years, is that the guy who flies the drone. I mean, it's an aircraft. It will maintain its path. Just because it gets jammed doesn't mean that it sort of like falls out of the sky. I mean, yes, if it gets left sort of like in the air and the pilot allows it to hover, I don't know, 5 meters away from the jammer, then you're going to have problems. But these things have inertia. So, I mean, it's to the point now where even a guy like me can see obviously when a drone is coming in and it's going to make a strike, and and where the jamming starts affecting the signal, and you see the drone fly straight into, whatever it is, because the jamming was not strong enough to interrupt the flight of the drone, right? And so that's like, and the pilots have figured this out a long time ago, and I assume that their attack, the directions of attack they take. I mean, it would seem to make sense that if you come in low, which is what they do, if the jammer is above that, then to a certain extent, maybe the terrain is interfering with that. Who knows? I mean, I'm not a drone pilot. But the other thing is that, technology marches on. And right now, the sort of latest tech jump is that both sides have figured out or gotten their hands on fiber optic cable, which just unwinds like a wire guided missile. And I'm seeing reports, yeah, and you can get a spool, it's like this big, and 40 kilometers of cable. Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, it's like I'm there.
Here's a
I'm
couple
seeing.
I could show you some of them, so I'll try to hold this up to
Yeah,
you.
yeah. I mean, it's like, and so it's like, and
Yeah,
both
here's
sides are
some
doing it in like
specs on them.
so what about jammers? Well, obviously these things don't care about jammers if they got the fiber optic cable.
So
So,
cable behind it as it flies?
yeah,
Yeah,
It it's
it's
like, it's
totally
basically
visible.
it's as thick as a thread. You would think that it would catch on a tree or, whatever, but basically it doesn't. I talked to one drone guy, he says, yeah, it really is it works, but what you can't do is hover, and what you can't do is back up. Then you sort of get into issues with the cable. But as long as you keep flying forward, sort of like in a general, like towards the enemy kind of attitude, then somehow the cables don't get cut, is what one drone guy told me.
Think of it like a tow. It's a
Yeah,
flyable
yeah,
tow missile, basically.
yeah.
Code works the same way. You find the target with your optic, you fire it as it's shooting out, it's unraveling a wire guide, a fiber optic, cable back
Yeah.
there, and the operator's using a little joystick to just guide that missile right into the target. Well, you can't really. It's very hard to jam them. You could maybe use a dazzler on it or something, but it's very difficult. So now they've swapped to doing this on the drones, and now you're seeing them where, yeah, there's some of them that are upwards of 10 kilometers or something. But
I mean,
like you,
like I say, the biggest number that I have seen, I mean, it's like it was a reliable source, but my really, was 40 kilometers. So we'll see about that. But I mean, it's just the technology, it's not stopping.
no.
And that's just the technical side. There's on the tactical side, one of the things that one is worth bearing in mind when you're thinking about how drones work is that no drone ever goes out on its own to go fly, right? It's not, World War One, triplanes, let's go and find the Red Baron. It's not that. I mean, wherever they send a drone, there's already an observation drone watching. And the object, and there's a network, and there is a command post, and the pilots are talking to each other if they're not sitting next to one another. And the guy with the observation drone is talking in the strike drone. And I mean, I've seen this happen in a command post, and and the observation drone guy will talk the strike drone guy through the correct flight path. Around, I don't know, around this building, I don't know, down this street, whatever it is. because the field of view on the FPV drones is very narrow. So the both sides long ago have figured out the way you deal with that is you have an observation drone. So if you lose your observation drone, you have to have another one ready to send up, and so on and so on. And I mean, they've already figured out how to have drones on call launch. Like if there's an armored attack, they'll have like different drone operators at different locations. And the idea is to, once one drone comes in and makes a strike, they want to have another one moving to make a strike, and then another one readying, depending on the distance and more. So it's kind of like a replication of what the Germans did during World War II with the Stuka dive bombers, where they were like circling like taxi cabs, in a taxi rank. And it's just this like, it's like we have these air assets, they're, they're ready to go. As soon as we find a target, we'll just bring them in one after the other. And, how do you deal with that? Well, not easily.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm totally getting my money's worth of this meeting.
Hey, yeah, another question. What have you seen or heard about with these I guess the Russian thermobaric weapons they use, or those vacuum bombs they say, because I guess those TOS 2 and TOS 3 launchers, basically get these things to go out much, much further. What have you heard about those and the impact or effectiveness of
I've
those
talked
when
to people who've been hit by them. They're like horrendous if they come in and you're like underneath it. It's like, I mean, everybody says it's like hell. I mean, but yeah, it seems like the air itself catches on fire. Yeah, I mean, it burns out a certain area. Yeah, it goes down into bunkers. It's just, the thing is, however, that they're not very accurate. So, and the flame is to a certain extent susceptible to, like terrain and buildings and so on. So, it's like if you're behind a wall, you have much better chances of surviving. If you're like, down on the ground by the wall, maybe you'll be fine. Maybe you'll just get a sunburn. And the other thing is that they don't shoot very far, and they're big and they're loud and they're noisy. And so and they are, there are a few things on the battlefield that are more inflammable. So the Russian tactical doctrine that since the early part of the war is that if they've made the decision to level, usually an urban area, but it could be a fortified area, then they will fight to get close enough to bring in these toss things. And the idea is that that is part of the very heavy firepower that they will use to try and flatten something. But it's like the guys with the Ukrainians will attempt to shoot back, and these things are, these things are as big as an artillery piece, and and they are susceptible to everything that could hit a artillery piece. So big picture, it seems like the Russians are able to use toss in those places where the Ukrainians are so worn down that they really don't have a lot of like firepower to resist with. And sometimes the Russians succeed, and sometimes they guess wrong, and the Ukrainians are able to retaliate.
Yeah. So with this war, eventually it is going to start come to an end one way or the other at some point. They don't usually last indefinite. Do you think that Russia, like I know people have been saying that the Russians are just going to pause for a few years, they're going to restart, and this time they're going to go and take on NATO directly. Do you think that is legitimately their plan, to try and go and take on the rest of NATO, or to grab the Baltic states? I mean, considering
Well,
they had with Ukraine.
simple answer, no, I don't. But there's a qualification. Vladimir Putin and the people in charge of Russia, from this perspective, have the overall goal of basically reconstituting either the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. It's kind of, like six of one, half against the other. But that's sort of like, what do they want? What would they prefer to have if Santa Claus was going to give them something? That's what they want. How do they get to that goal? Well, okay, step by step. And one of the steps is control of Ukraine in their mind. Picking a fight with NATO right now, right this second? No, obviously not. The army's gutted. The Ukrainians are fighting too hard, and so on. But if Ukraine were under Russian control, or even if Ukraine were basically a frozen conflict and most of the European military was a peacekeeper in a peacekeeper mode in Ukraine, why not start a hybrid war attacking Estonia? I mean, it can't hurt, right? And maybe it'll work. Maybe there's enough people who are mad enough who are, I don't know, feel like they are actually Russians and they want to be part of Russia, or maybe it's possible to pay them off or whatever. Why not? Why not trying to stabilize Estonia? Why not? And yeah, maybe the destabilization might work. And the way that the Russian strategy works is look for the opportunity, exploit the opportunity. If the opportunity develops better, then exploit it some more. So, no, there's no plan, but why stop?
Yeah. Yeah. I know
Which,
we kind of look at that. I mean, like as a fiction writer, obviously those are great scenarios to look at and explore. And there's the part of me that worked at UConn for a long time, and I look at it from just an actual realistic goal of like what kind of equipment they have, how long it takes to reconstitute, the fact that they really are not able to overcome Ukraine despite the disadvantages Ukraine has. And, everyone is, rightly pointing out, Russia's a mess. They're not able to organize it, do this current operation. How in the heck are we going to then make the claim that they're going to be able to launch some even bigger one against a more equipped, better adversary?
it's just
Flying the face of reality sometimes.
again, they flew in the face of logic by attacking Ukraine. They had years of experience. I mean, it wasn't like they didn't know that the Ukrainians would fight. They'd been fighting the Ukrainians in Donbass for about 8 years.
Yeah, to
So
a stalemate.
it wasn't a secret. Yet there was a decision made based on false assumptions to a certain extent, it seems like. Certainly, the future gives no guarantee against more bad decisions based on false assumptions. So there's that. Uh,
I think he
Beyond,
legitimately thought that his military that he'd been upgrading for a long time. I think he legitimately was under the impression that they were actually ready to do something like this. And then when it started to unfold and completely unravel, I wonder if a lot of people had some accidents because suddenly it was like, wow, you guys have been telling me for all these years we're ready to go, and now
I
we
read a
find out
really
you
interesting
guys can't even have like.
article in Norwegian, security pub about that, and the argument there was no, actually, it was more thought through than it looks to us in the West.
Yeah.
That in fact the sort of decapitation, fast regime change was a high risk operation, which the argument goes the Russians and the Putin leadership knew might go wrong at the quickly, but it was worth the risk. And the fallback plan was just take Donbass, take southern Ukraine, in an attritional war. And the argument made in this article was, since the Russians were able to redeploy from Kiev, so after the Battle of Kiev, and recommit to an offensive in Donbass, that is an indicator, the argument went, that actually the Russians were executing, they weren't flailing, they were executing a fallback plan. And I'm not sure I believe it, but it's an interesting theory. It really is. During the Battle of Kiev, I mean, it's like every day you'd get up and sort of like, and I was going to the lines there, and it was like, so have the Russians, and we knew about this great big, column of Russian, armor stretching dozens of kilometers. Why aren't they attacking? and it was, well, yeah, but I mean, there's only one road. There are swamps on the other side of the road. Our guys are in the swamps, and they tried to dig them out yesterday, didn't work. So they sent some more vehicles today. They got blown up. So it looks like the Russians are trying to figure out what to do now. And it's like you can have these great big plans, but when you bring them down on the ground, sometimes it doesn't work.
No plan survives first contact. That's like rule one, Yeah. Dan let's see, we got Dan, Tom, Gary, Robert, Lukens, Ken. Did any of you guys want to ask some questions? I know we're getting closer towards the end here, but I wanted to make sure you guys had your chance or your opportunity. And if you have questions you want to ask, guys, this is your chance and your time.
Looks
If
like
not,
we're done.
I have more questions. But
I'll go. I'm having a great time.
no, I mean, I'm always an inquisitive guy by nature, and so I always ask lots of questions. Remember, I was an interrogator in Iraq, so my whole job was asking questions and finding information. So one of the things I was curious about is with Ukrainian soft, okay? I, I know some of the guys who've been over there studying and training that stuff up for a very long time because I used to work with them at UCOM and they used to be over at Sakia there. Why do you suppose it's taken them so long to start really going after some of the critical infrastructure inside Russia? And why do you think they haven't? There's a few points that they could really hit that are like no shit jugular points that they could just bleed them out with if they were to hit a few of these areas. Is there some hesitation and maybe not taking it too far?
Yeah, there's all of that. The answer is all. I would say the answer is all of the above. I mean, one of the things is just capacity, right? I mean, it's just like the tool that they use to do that is a long range drone. At the start of the war, I am told that they could make about like something like 5 or 10 long range drones in a month, right? And now they're up to something like they say
Hundreds of thousands.
five. No, like long range drones. We're talking about fly to Volgograd, fly to Murmansk, like those kind. They can
Okay.
make. God. I think the number is 500 a month, and they want to spike it. I mean, these are real airplanes. They long distance, and so part of the reason that we didn't see attacks like that was simply they didn't have the tools. That's number one. Number two, although the the Ukrainians aren't as nervous about Russian retaliation and Russian nuclear strikes as let's say, well, anybody else.
Sure.
The Ukrainians always are calculating, okay, if we do this, what are the Russians going to do to retaliate? And until the Ukrainians got the Russians far enough along, if you will, the conventional escalation chain, okay, it's like the Russians are going to sort of, in the Russian sense, only try and hit military targets. And then at a certain point, they said, screw that. We're going to use terror effectively. Not effectively. We are going to attack civilian targets, which expanded to, we are going to try and take down the power grid too. And, and they have, it seems like they, at times will target concentrations of civilians simply for the terror effect. And this has happened, time after time in the war. But I can't tell you that I know that they're doing it, but I can tell you for sure that the Ukrainians are accusing them. But in any case, the Ukrainians are always calculating, okay, so if we do this, what evil thing could the Russians do to us? And are we willing to take that risk? And as the war has gone on, more and more bad things have happened. The Russians have done more and more bad things. And the Ukrainians have first sort of like understood that, okay, we can survive that. Our society doesn't fall apart, because they're worried too. And part of it is, okay, well, that's another club out of the Russian bag. And
Yeah.
another is that the Ukrainians, I don't want to give you the idea that they know exactly what they're doing. They are so figuring it out as they are going, as it goes along. They, there was a big debate during 2023 about, okay, are we going to have a big conventional offensive? Are we going to try and be like NATO? No, that's stupid. No, we have to try, but we don't know how to do it. But our allies want us to do it, and it's like, and there was this huge, where are we going to attack? Well, and it was. Why all of
Then
this was out in the open?
the force
Why all
into
this was out in
two,
the
that was
open? Well,
real.
because it's an open society, because Ukraine has never really been in a war before. Or maybe next time they'll have better OPSEC than this time. It would sometimes seem to me that it'd be hard for them to have worse OPSEC. But
Well,
actually, they're pretty good. I'm ragging on the Ukrainians for no good reason. But in any case, and then it is, okay, so all right, now we can hit in Russia. What are we going to hit? And it seems like initially they were going after, no, it was very clear. Initially, they went after super high value things like, bombers on the airfield
Sure.
and, headquarters with, lieutenant generals inside of them. And then it was a very specific targeted campaign that was targeting shells, artillery shells, and artillery rockets. And they found, they found the main storage bases where the Russians kept those munitions,
That was a big
and
hit.
they attacked them, and they burned them, and I don't think they destroyed them completely, but they cut into them. And right now, I am sitting here telling you that everybody's telling, everything I see says that in terms of shells going back and forth, right now the Ukrainians are at rough parity with the Russians, which is nothing like it was, like a year ago. Then it was like a 10-1. And most people, most of the people say, and because the Ukrainians took it to the Russian artillery shell reserves, is a factor in that change. Increasing Western supply of 155 also. And so, and then, but it's like at the start of the war, people, history geeks like me, for instance, were saying, well, the Ukrainians really should go after the Russian petrochemical network because that's what the Americans did to the Germans and it worked. So, the Ukrainians should get their act together. Why don't they listen to me? And I'm sure that there were
Like
people
they're starting
inside.
to.
Yeah, I'm sure there were people inside the Ukrainian general staff who were saying just the same thing, but priorities, focuses, this, that, and the other. And they didn't get around, they didn't come to the point where, okay, let's go systematically after petrochemical until basically systematically it started in December, and they're still at it.
Well, let me ask you a quick follow-up on part of that, and then we've got a couple questions. So Rob has he posted a couple of them, but he's currently at work riding in his ambulance, so he can't actually ask them himself. But one of the follow-ups I had on this with the special forces, these guys essentially, I mean, they share an ethnicity, a language, and demographically the same. That affords you some very unique opportunities for soft activities behind the lines because you can infiltrate a lot easier when you guys look alike and you guys share the same language. Like we could in and out through Canada pretty easily between the US and the US and Canada. I could not personally infiltrate and walk around and do well inside the Middle East because I just won't fit in. With that, why do you suppose we don't see a lot of smaller unit sabotage operations with Ukrainian soft going deep into the lines? Because there's a lot of operations that don't take a lot of people, like just placing IEDs, EFPs on the sides of major highways and thoroughfares, hitting a rail bridge at different points that over rivers and so on. Tunnels. I mean, a lot of these things could be hit with just like one or two
Yeah.
operators with a
Well,
small.
how do I answer that? The short answer is it's such a target rich environment that it seems to me like the decision at the top of the Ukrainian military has been, okay, super deep into Russia. We're only going to go if we want to try and assassinate somebody. And I mean, just this Thursday, a guy, a captain, he had been in charge of one of the surface-to-surface missile regiments.
Yeah.
And his battery, the Ukrainians concluded, in October, fired a surface-to-surface missile into a public funeral and like killed 59 people in a village and killed 59 people and wounded God only knows how many more. Again, it could have been a miss. It might not necessarily have been a terror attack, but the bottom line, the Ukrainian government decided it was, and they sent guys, assassins, to hunt this guy down, and they killed him with a car bomb, I think it was. An explosion was the report. And from what I'm seeing, that's really the only, I mean, again, there's probably stuff going on. There's certainly stuff going on that we don't know about. But in terms of what sort of surfaces information, deep inside Russia, by and large now it's just assassinations. In the early part of the war, there was this really spectacular operation. It seems like it was the Ukrainians, because who else? Apparently there's a section in the Trans-Siberian Railroad, kind of
That's
north
what I'm
of
talking about.
Mongolia. Yeah, you know about this? And
Well, yeah,
well,
but
I mean,
that's what
they
I'm
did
thinking.
it,
Like
and
they keep
it's like
hammering that, severing
in
that
winter, in like
line.
January 2023, while a train was in a tunnel, which you
Nailed it.
can't get to except through, like really complicated switchbacks, and there's no and the train blew up inside the tunnel, and because the tunnel itself it wasn't well built, the Russians can't keep it free of ice unless they constantly, send trains through to clean it, which they couldn't anymore because there was a blown up train inside of it. So they plugged the tunnel with ice until spring, which in Buryatia took until May, and then they had to dig all that stuff out. So really spectacular. I wrote a news story about it, good movie stuff. But there was probably a lot of resources involved and probably a whole lot of work, and maybe they had assets that they either had to burn or they couldn't use anymore. But it's it couldn't have been easy to get that done. And what we're seeing is stuff happening. No, what we hear the Ukrainian, GUR people, the military intelligence deep operators, is that the people that they have deep behind the lines, they're hunting for targets for long range drones. That's their sort of like mostly what they're, or more exactly, that's what you hear about what they're doing. And in terms of like active operations, in this day and age, why set a debt charge on a train with your, James Bond guy when you can fly in a drone?
Yeah. Hopefully they figure out some ways to, again, sever the road, rail, and pipeline connections just past the Ural Mountains, because you could cut the country in half. There's only a few points.
Russia's big. I mean, it's worth thousands of targets. I mean, the American military would have its work cut out for it to take down, let's say, the Russian transportation network. It's a huge country. It's an industrialized country.
Are you able to see Robert Lucan's question and Liam's, or I can read them off to you if you want?
No, let's see. Okay. Sure. Okay. I can't speak Robert Lucan's. I'm going to go on the tech side. Do you see more advanced systems that are being introduced, such as the autonomous systems that we know exist but are not talked about? Yes, I'm seeing lots of talk about AI drones, and not just in the air. I mean, the British are big time helping the Ukrainians out with sea drones. One of these days, somebody's going to write a history book about how the Russian Navy got kicked out of the Black Sea thanks to basically Royal Navy special operatives, because I don't think they're on the ground that much, but it's like
There's advisors, obviously.
it's these British boats that that run on Starlink, and it seems like the focus right now is not the more sophisticated technology, but how to get as much, I keep coming back to firepower as possible. What you don't want, what you're not really looking for is the next greatest, most longest range, most invulnerable drone. What you need is 1,000 of them. That's what people are working towards.
Yeah, cool.
And my next question to you is, do you see China volunteering troops as humanitarian excuse to give their real experience and aim for their future operations? No, I do not. I am not a China guy. I'm sort of an East European guy, so I don't really, I don't know much more than anybody who reads the news. But it really does seem like the Chinese are very careful. They're very long term. They're very, we're not going to take any stupid risks for some kind of short term gain. And there is the possibility, at least, that the Chinese, unlike the North Koreans, would be intelligent enough to realize that if you have troops that have never been in combat and you stick them into combat under these circumstances, that's almost that's almost a guarantee for just a huge amount of casualties and some really embarrassing defeats, because the way that war is being fought in this particular conflict is so, I'm not necessarily advanced, but different from even what NATO does, that it's like it's a risk to just take your guys and stick them there. Maybe some Chinese observers, but I mean, that's not, I would doubt that the Russians would let them pass sort of division level. And what you the lessons the lessons that are to be learned, they're like, at the company level and the platoon level, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Okay, so let's see. You recently written about changes in Ukraine's senior military leadership approach to fighting the war. Can you tell us a bit more about this? Sure. Um, One of the long running, just sort of like endless complaints since the early days of the war is how come there are already standout Ukrainian units, brigades, which for whatever reason started out with an effective chain of command. And lots of times it was because the unit had spent time in the Donbass sector prior in the interwar period, if you will. And anyway, they started performing well, and that where they attracted volunteers, they attracted support, and they by the middle of 2023 easily, and there were, let's say, 100 combat brigades in the Ukrainian army, and you could point to like 10 which were like already standout brigades. You could see that they were like doing the job better, more efficient, professional, blah blah blah, and there were another 10 or 15 that seemed like to be on that track. And time went on, and the summer offensive was a bust, and people just couldn't understand, people like me, observers, why it was that it seemed like the Ukrainian army pyramid was sort of like giving the top jobs to long-serving guys, yet these younger colonels and majors, who lots of times they started out the war as civilians, right? Why aren't they getting promoted? Why aren't their units being expanded? Why aren't they? I mean, they've come up with winning solutions. Why isn't the Ukrainian military learning from this winning solution? And earlier this month, the Ukrainian army finally seems to have come to the conclusion that all these people in the cheap seats like me were right, which really means that they sort of admitted it to themselves, and that no, okay, protecting careers and doing it sort of the doctrinal way is all very well and good, but we got a war to fight. These guys really are performers, and what they decided to do was create what they call core, but what NATO people would really call a division, and the heart, the backbone of this larger formation is one of these high performing brigades, which will be expanded and given more resources and given more support, and that will become the basic fighting formation subordinate to the regional commands, which in turn will kind of more or less be like what we would call a corps. And it is really, the Ukrainians are at this point, it's a great idea that now everybody agrees it's a great idea, while before you could see how the army didn't really want to do it. I mean, they didn't like force these guys out, but you could. I talked to people. There's a couple of brigades that are based in Kyiv that by my newspaper is in contact with, also Kharkiv, pretty frequently, and they say, well, it's a good idea, and it seems like it's going to happen, but it's not going to get implemented overnight. So the takeaway on that is that it took the Ukrainian army, and basically, in my view, basically the problem was careerism in the army, and guys who doing it the old way, there was enough of them that didn't want to stop on toes, even with the war going on, that the top command of the army chose not to open up senior career command positions to sort of non-career guys. It took the Ukrainians 3 years basically to do that. Not quite, but 3 years. So it's like, if you want to be an optimist, great job. If you're being a pessimist, come on, guys. 3 years during a war when you're attacked by Russia, that's not so good. So that's that. Okay, next, Lee, again, there have been debates about Ukraine membership in NATO versus some nebulous, I agree with that, ironclad security arrangement. If using Israel as a comparison, the world knows that Israel has nuclear weapons, and these have great deterrence value. How much appetite, oh God, these are great questions. How much appetite is there in Ukraine for developing nuclear capacity to underrate their future security? Oh, I mean, James, this is, you want a war scenario for a novel. Here you go. The Ukrainians, I think, as pretty much everybody here knows, in 1996 signed an agreement to give their nuclear weapons to Russia, in exchange for which they got guarantees from Russia, the United States, and Britain that Ukraine's territorial integrity would be respected. America and Britain are doing quite well on that. The Russians no. And so from time to time, you will hear in Ukrainian media and sort of like lower level politics, damn it, we need nuclear weapons. Why we give away our nuclear weapons? You can see how if we had nuclear weapons, none of this would be happening. Those idiots, it's like, and then it's like whoever you want to be mad at. It's the Americans who sold us out. It's the British. It's the Russians. And from time to time, like one of my colleagues, I think he was in Reuters, tried to corner Zelensky. It's like, okay, so President Zelensky, don't you think that nuclear weapons would be a great thing for Ukraine to have? He said, yeah, well, okay, maybe shoulda, woulda, coulda, but the fact is that we don't have them and we don't want to have them. So, we are hoping that, our allies will help us defend ourselves because we really don't want to have nuclear weapons. And he never said, and that means that Ukraine is going to get nuclear weapons or that Ukraine wants to have nuclear weapons. And again, this is, take from it what you want. But these are just, these are well-known facts that are just, you don't have to think about it. It's just everybody knows. When the Chernobyl nuclear station blew up, there were 2 functional reactors there. Only one was blown up. There's another one, reactor number 4. They turned it off in, I think, 2006, but it still works there. And there are still maintenance crews there. There's, still, I think they took the fuel out, but in any case, it's still in full working. No, they did not take the fuel out. That's a breeder reactor that was built by the Soviet Union. It was built specifically to create weapons grade uranium. The knowledge base, not just to assemble a nuclear device, but to create weapons grade fissionable materials, is in this country. It's been in this country for a long time. It's taught in institutes. It's just, it is, Ukraine is like Germany in that sense. They have full level international standard knowledge of nuclear technology. And so should they choose to develop a nuclear device, really the only limitation would be doing it without other people finding out. And, maybe they could, maybe they couldn't, but the capacity absolutely is there. So if you want to paint a nightmare scenario, Ukraine on its own scenario, then just think about, okay, what about Ukraine and nuclear weapons? Because it's not like, Saudi Arabia, where for them it's a technological leap to get to nuclear weapons. It is, the knowledge, it's all there. So they don't talk about it very much. Because it is just so well known that these capacities are there. And I'd be curious to know how specifically, how close, how open the references are that the Ukrainians make to developing a nuclear capacity in close conversations, with the Americans and so on. Because it's leverage. But we don't, on the open source side, we see very little of it. Usually it's like somebody makes noise on the internet, and then somebody else says, "Well, we don't, that's silly. The Ukraine doesn't want nuclear weapons," and people go on from there. And is that the end of the questions?
I think that's actually it. I think we managed to work our way through it there.
Well, guys, I really appreciate it. I don't get to talk in like this much detail almost ever, so I probably
But you found the right group that likes it.
I could probably got more out of this than you guys. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'll probably try to see if I can't arrange a couple more of these. I'm finally getting this book done. I've got like 2 books that are releasing at the end of this month, so it's just been like focus on that. But as those kind of get done and we get ready for the next round, there'll be a little more time. We'll try to have more of a discussion like this, but there's there's a handful of other readers. I want to see if I can reach out directly to them and make sure they're involved in it, because there's a few of these guys that are, recently retired 06s, 05s who, taught at the War College, worked in some of these different commands in different areas like that. I think they have some really good questions they'd love to be able to ask you and talk shop with a few more technical things too, probably. So
No, yeah. I'm
All right.
just glad for the attention. That's all I can say.
yeah,
Wonderful, wonderful books based on reality and journalism based on reality. That's pretty good combination.
yeah,
We
yeah.
do the best we can.
I mean, this is how you create good books, how you create good stories. You got to talk to people from all sides that are going to give you that perspective, because you want to be able to see where people are coming from, because it helps you create a better story, better characters, better dialogue to make them actually real. You write a Russian character or a Chinese character, they better have the same belief and perception that a Chinese person or Russian would have towards Russia, or towards like NATO, the United States, different countries, just like when you create the opposite characters. And sometimes that's very triggering for people to see that. And I'm sorry, but that's kind of real.
It's like
It is what
we
it is.
all are in our own little information. What do you call it?
We're
Like
storytellers. That's how it is.
yeah, but I mean, it's like nobody has perfect view of anything, right? And so, all you can do is just try and exchange information as best as you can and try and learn from other people. I mean, you guys,
Yeah.
most of you or most of you from, it seems like the States, and all of you, or close to all of you, seem to be like, from sort of NATO and the West. And, I don't get to talk to guys like you that much on a daily basis. So just the kind of questions you're asking, that's information for me. That's really useful information for me, because
Yeah.
it's like I'm in part, I'm writing for guys like you. So, it's like, if I have a better idea of who you guys are, that's great. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you a lot.
There's so many questions about some of the little minutiae and detail and the tactics and strategy and how they're pursuing this and what they're doing with that. You're right. It's probably only like conversations like this, maybe some print media might have that, but very few people are actually talking about that. It's always, what bleeds is what leads. And so it's a very sensationalized stuff. And I get it, but that may drive a lot of clicks and impressions, but it doesn't actually inform you or help you understand something better. And that's why I like doing conversations like this. It's just so much better.
Well, it's like when you go ahead.
I was going to say, Jay, thank you both, and I would look forward to the opportunity of further discussions of this nature, certainly, and subject, as well as you well know, James, that you're not the only one that spins books on the basis of China theme, and it's startling, as a matter of fact, how many those who write novels are writing about very specific scenarios associated with that. So
I'm hoping to continue, because it needs to be more of a focus. More than that, too, people need to understand, one, geography, where these things are actually taking place at. But they also need to understand why some fights are important and need to happen, and why they must be won at all costs. Because I'm telling you, I know a lot of people talk about, Taiwan and why it's not our fight. Well, I'm telling you, this is why it's your fight, okay? It's
Right.
called electronics. And if you want to have a future, you're going to need to be prepared to defend some of these allies and nations that we are on good terms with, that have been our allies for a very long time, that happen to be experts in that field. Because, the CHIPS Act that they passed a while back, that is not going to be the solution for quite some time. It takes years to build a fab. It takes years, like close to a decade, to actually get the engineers and the people trained, the education pipeline created to generate the students who are then going to be able to advance and learn how to use this stuff and build it out. Because this is not something we did. This is something we design. We're very good at designing it. And then we send this to specialized places like Taiwan, where then that's like their sole thing. That's what they put all their effort into learning and educating themselves on how to do, and do very well. They don't do the design part, that's us. But now that we're wanting to bring that back on shore, we're finding out we don't actually have the education pipeline built to make that work yet. it's happening, but people got to understand that that's not an overnight solution. So in the meantime, there's things you're going to have to look at, kind of guarding until that's in place. But so it's a global world, whether you like it or not. Doesn't matter. The fact is a fact, and you can't change it. Your feelings aren't gonna change that, But I will end the recording here. So appreciate you guys staying with us, and for all those of you who sat and listened for this whole time. Thank you.
No, thanks.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.